Hey there, brilliant people. So today's question is, why do we ignore our intuition? It's an important question, really, because obviously on this channel we talk a lot about intuition and particularly conscious intuition. But if we're going to really fully develop our intuition to be that powerhouse, that superpower even, we need it to be fully conscious. And that means we really can't afford to ignore our intuition. So we want to know, well, what would cause us to ignore our intuition? Well, sometimes it can be because we haven't developed the necessary levels of self-trust. And that can be because of all other reasons of other things going on in our lives. Like if we've been through whatever situations in our lives that have conditioned us to really trust what other people say more than what we say about situations. If we don't put any value on our own opinions, on our own perspective, it does tend to set us up for ignoring our intuition. That's a whole topic in itself. There is lots of resources on this channel to help you, look at that sort of stuff. There's lots of resources in my book that could also help you. There's also, of course, just therapy. Anyway, whatever it is that's going on, you need to work through that. I will mention that on this channel, one of the resources is on this channel, I have talked about the 3 levels of trust. So that might be a good place for you to start, and I'll make sure that there's a link to that video. And towards the end of this video, there'll be a link to the video on the 3 levels of trust. So that might be a good place for you to start. But why else would we ignore our intuition? Well, assuming that we are good at listening to ourselves. Well, of course, if we're confused, because the thing is that if we're confused about, well, is this my intuition or not? So the problem is, again, that there are ways that we can work through that. You can read about some of that in my book. But when we are confused as to whether it's our imagination or a genuine intuition, what that actually means is that our intuition it's kind of like we've only got part of the picture. So this goes back to being able to then, when we have conscious intuition, leaning into it more. Because when we're confused, it means that the intuition is quite faint or maybe a little fuzzy. So there's something there, but it's not enough for us to kind of go, oh gosh, I just have to do that. Well, if we don't have conscious intuition, if our intuition is still relatively undeveloped, we will tend to ignore it if it's just a faint feeling. But when we have conscious intuition, we know how to lean into it. We know how to stop, and even if we have to stop and meditate for a while or ask ourselves some questions to get our intuition focused, we know how to stop and lean into that faint intuitive feeling so that it can actually get stronger, that it can actually get clearer. This is actually most common when we're getting intuitions not about necessarily ourselves, but about other people. Or, conversely, paradoxically, it can be about ourselves, but it can be particularly around something where we really, 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 really want one thing to happen. And actually, that's not what's going to happen. So in that case, well, we're ignoring it not because of confusion, but because we're really attached to a particular outcome. This is why, in Practology, we practice a lot of completion so that we can have that more sort of detached space. Or Stoicism is a really good way to learn to practice radical acceptance, because the more that we can practice radical acceptance, the more open we will be to whatever is going to happen. And that enables us to listen to our intuition more, because we're not going to ignore things that it tells us that we don't want to hear. So, in other words, one of the main reasons why we ignore our intuition is because, well, perhaps we're not really open to what it has to say to us. But the more we practice completion or radical acceptance, the better we'll do. And that means we will remember that you're brilliant.